All right, good morning, 7 o'clock. Go ahead and get started. So really what I'm going to be covering today is just what your final assignment is about. We're just going to code up an example from scratch. I don't have any code pre-done or anything like that. We're just going to make it up as we go along, but it will be something similar to what you have to do for your final assignment. So it'll be a good starting point, and then of course adapt it and modify it to fit what your assignment is actually asking for. So before we get into that though, just a couple notes to put out is, the course does end this coming Tuesday night at 11:59 p.m. So any assignment that you want to turn in, it must be turned in before Tuesday night at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I cannot accept any work, period, after that time. So that means you cannot turn in this final assignment late. Also, if you want to go back and redo any previous assignment to have it regraded, you also have to have it turned in by Tuesday night at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. For any previous assignment, if you made a bad grade, you can redo it and resubmit it, and you could get a better grade. But also note that any regrading or resubmission of an older assignment will incur the late penalty points, and you can look at the syllabus to see, what those late penalty points are. But if you did poorly, you could possibly improve your grade. But one more time, I cannot stress how important it is. I cannot accept any work, period, after Tuesday night at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. All right, that being said, let's go ahead and get started. So, for your final project, you're making kind of like a media rental system, right? So for your media, you have a media class, you have some ebooks, some movie DVDs, some music CDs, and things like that. Those are the things that somebody can rent out, right? And then you have a manager class, which manages your media. It keeps a list of all the media. Let's see, you can load it to a file. You can save it from you can load it from a file. You can save the media to a file. And then, of course, there's a media rental system, which is just like a menu that allows you to pick which media that you want to rent out the media, and those kind of things. So what we will do this today is we'll do an example of the media. We're not going to do media. We're going to do something with cars, because last time I did some example with cars. So let's kind of keep building on that. And we'll have a manager class for our cars. And then we'll have like a car, maybe not a car rental system, or maybe a car rental system, or a car dealership system, something like that, that either sells cars or rents cars or whatever have you. Okay, so let's get started. So first, let's make some cars, because the cars is what we want to manage. We're either going to sell some cars or rent some cars, something like that. So let's make a class called a car. All right. And let's give it some variables that is the same no matter what kind of car you have. And we're going to strip it down. We're going to keep it pretty simple. I don't want to overcomplicate it. So for car, we can have, say, the year it was made, and we'll say a string that is the make of the car, and we'll have a string that's the color. We'll just say these are the variables that describe a car in our class. And note they are private. Let's make a constructor for the car. Okay, public car. And we have to give it all of these things. We'll give it the year, the make, and the color. And then we will save that to the variables in the class itself. So say the year is equal to that year parameter, the make is equal to that make parameter, and the color is equal to that color parameter. All right, let's make a toString method that just shows us the information for that car. So we're having a string S. We'll just print out the year, a space, the make, a space, and what is it, the color? Return S. Actually, we can just return that. So when we do a toString, we're just taking the variables that make up our car, and we're just making them into a string. All right. So this is our base class car. This can be like your base class media for your assignment. All right, so let's go to main. Let's just make a car, because you want to continuously test your code as you go along. You don't want to try to, code up your entire project and then try to compile and run it. You want to, anytime you add any new functionality to your program, you want to go ahead and test it then. So let's make a new car. New car, and what is it? And what's the year? Say it's a 2000 Ford, and it's red. That's the color. And then let's just print it out. Out.println car.toString. There we go. Let's run that, compile it and run it. And there you go. We get our car printed out. It made this new car. We are printing out the car, and that's it printed out, which is correct. It's the year, the make, and the color of the car. Okay, that's kind of like our base class car. Well, let's make some more specialized car. Let's make an electric car. Just like in your assignment, you have like an e-book, a movie DVD, and those will extend your media. Well, for our example, we have an electric car that will extend the car. And so what is some variables that describe an electric car, right? So if we look at our car, our car has the year, the make, the color. Since our electric car extends the car, that means our electric car also has those variables. Those variables exist in this electric car. We just don't have to manually specify them, because whenever we extend a class, this is just saying an electric car, it is a car, but it's a more specialized kind of car. And anything that exists in car also exists in electric car. So we already have the year, the make, and the color, because we're getting that from the car. All right, but what extra stuff does an electric car have? And for us, we're just going to say, what's the charge on it? Like, what's the charge on the batteries? Is it 25%, 50%, 100%, whatever the case is? But the charge will just be how much juice is left in our batteries. All right, so this is the constructor for an electric car. So for an electric car, we still need to know the year, the make, and the color, but we also need the charge, right? And here with the super, this is calling the constructor of the super class, which is car. So the car constructor, its parameters are year, make, and color. So when we look at the car, for its constructor, it's the year, the make, and the color. So for an electric car, this is calling the car constructor with the year, the make, and the color. But we also have the charge. That's the new thing here. So we have to say that. Okay. Let's also update our toString method. So when we call super.toString, that's calling the toString method of the super class. So the super class is car. So this is calling the car.toString method. If we look at it, it gives us a string with the year, the make, and the color, right? So with an electric car, that's fine. This will give us the year, the make, and the color. But let's add on to here a space and the charge. So super.toString gives us a string with the year, the make, the model. Then we're just going to put in a space and add on the charge there. So that's really all there is to an electric car. Let's make another one. Let's make a gas car. It's also going to extend car. So what extra variable could gas car have? We'll just say private, it's gallons. How many gallons of gas do we have left? It's probably better as a float, I guess, because you could have 3.2 gallons of gas left. But this will be a variable that represents how many gallons of gas that we have left in the tank. All right, this is the constructor. Just like with the electric car, we still need the year, the make, and the color, but we also need how many gallons of gas are left in it. And just like with the electric car, where we call the constructor of the superclass, we call the same thing here, but then we also have the extra stuff, the gallons that we need to save. And there we go. That's the constructor for a gas car. And then we'll also do the, actually, we can copy that. Just like we had this 2-string for the electric car, where we had the car 2-string and then we added on the charge. Well, it's going to be almost the same thing for the gas car, except for instead of charge, we're going to add on the gallons. Okay. So now we have a car and 2 subclasses, an electric car and a gas car, that extend the car. So let's go into main, let's use them. So we have this car, but instead of just a normal car, we're going to make it an electric car. And for an electric car, we need to give the year, the make, the model, but also the charge. Let's say the battery is at 75%. Let's make car 2, we'll make it a gas car. Say it's a 2010 Chevy, it's blue, and there's 5.7 gallons of gas in it. And then let's print that. Car 2. Right, let's call this car 1. So there we go. We got car 1. We have car 1, which is an electric car. These are the parameters to it. And then we just print out that car 1. This is car 2. It's a gas car. There's the parameters to it. And then we'll print it out. All right, we made some changes. Let's run it and make sure it's working right. There we go. There is our electric car. It's a 2000 Ford. It's red, and that's what the charge is. And then we have this a 2010 Chevy. It's blue and 5.7 gallons of gas. Something else we could add on to here. Let's look back at the 2-string. Let's also tell what type of car it is. So for an electric car, at the beginning of it, let's just put the word electric. Electric. Get that spelled right. Yeah. So that we know it's an electric car. And then the similar thing for the gas at the beginning of it. Let's put it's a gas car. Oops. There we go. So now when we run it, we should see electric and then gas at the beginning of these. There you go. So this is an electric car. There's the parameters for it. And then we have a gas car, and those are the properties of the gas car. Okay. So that's kind of most of part 1 of your assignment. Obviously, it's your assignment, you're doing media and you're doing several other classes with it. But this is an example with cars that fits along nicely with what you need to do for your assignment. Okay. Next part of your assignment is you need to make a manager class that manages all your cars. So we're just going to call it our car manager, right? So for car manager, we want some variables. We're going to have a constructor, and then we're going to have some methods. So to manage our cars, we need to keep a list of the cars. Okay. So let's have a list of the cars. Have a list of our cars. We'll call it that right there. We have a list of our cars. Okay. Let's make a constructor, the car manager. We need to make the list. Like, oops. There we go. That's creating our list of cars. And so what kind of methods do we need for our car manager? Well, let's say we need the ability to add a car to it. So let's make a method to, actually, let's not do that. Let's think a little bit ahead and read a little bit ahead in our assignment. So in our assignment, it says, it stores a list of media objects. Well, we're storing a list of car objects. It has the functionality to load media objects from files. So we need to be able to load it from a file, right? So let's say a method, public void load from file, and then we'll have to do some work in here to actually load it from a file, but we'll get there. Okay. Has a functionality to add new objects to the list. So we need to be able to add a car to the list. Let's see. Find all media objects for specific tile and returns the list. So it's going to look for cars with a specific title, and it's going to return the list. So the return needs to be a list of cars. Okay. And it has the functionality to rent media based on an ID. Okay, well, we need to be able to rent a car based on an ID. Okay. Okay. So there we go. That's kind of all of the methods that we need for our car manager, but now we actually need to do the work, right? So let's start one at a time. We'll start right here because this is the easiest one. So to add a car, that's really easy. We have cars.add car. Easy enough. We added a car onto our list. All right, let's minimize that. That was done. Okay. Yeah, let's look at this one next. So it's going to find cars. Let's read what our assignment says. Find all media objects for a specific title and returns the list. So here it's saying we are going to return a list, but we need to find cars based on a title. Well, we need to be able to find media objects based on a title. For us, let's find cars based on the make of it. So any cars that match this make, we're going to get that list of cars. So since we are going to return a list, we need to make a list for it to return. So we have made a list of cars, and now we're going to return that list. There's some more work we have to do in here, but this is the gist of it. We make a list and we return the list. But now, what needs to be in that list? The contents of that list, for our example, is going to be any car that has this make in it. So we need to do a loop through all of the cars. And if any car has that make, then we want to put that car on the list. So let's make a loop. This will loop through all of the cars in the list. So now if the car, well, we need to get the make of the car. So let's add a method in here that gets us the make of the car. Do public string get make. We'll return the make of the car. That way we can ask the car what its make is. So now we'll say if the car, if its make equals ignore, we'll use the equals ignore case. That way we don't have to worry about if things are capitalized or lowercase. So this loops through all of the cars. If this car, if we're going to get its make, if that make is equal to this make parameter, then we're going to add it to the list. And that's all there is to it. Let's add some comments in here. Make a list of cars. Loop through all the cars. Check if the car make is equal to the make parameter. there is a match, so add the car to the list. And then we're going to be done, return the list. Okay, that's all there is to the find cars. So we're done with that. So we're going to rent based on this string ID. So that causes us to think a little bit more. So if we have the capability to rent out a car, then the car itself needs to remember, is it rented or not? So let's add another parameter in here. Print will be a Boolean. Let's call it rented. Is the car rented or not? Let's add some more stuff in here. Add as another parameter. So this dot rented in the constructor is rented. Okay. So now we have another parameter that says, is the car rented? So now here in the toString, let's also add on here if it's rented or not. There we go. There's something we haven't done yet. So I changed the constructor of car, right? I added on this rented parameter. Well, in our subclasses, in our electric car, we're doing the super constructor here. So now it also wants to know, is it rented or not? So we also have to add that parameter onto our subclasses. Oops, rented, and then of course the same in the gas car. Boolean rented. So let's go back to our main and kind of test some of these things so far. So let's see. Format. Yep. Yeah, there we go. So main. So in main, we have a car when we have an electric car. You know, there's the year, the make, the rented, the charge, but also it now wants the parameter if it's rented or not. For electric car, we'll say it's true, and for the gas car, we'll say it's false. All right, so let's run this so far. And there we go. We have an electric car, those parameters, and it's true. Yep, there we go. And it's true that it's rented, and this one is false that it's not rented. And that's right. Okay. So let's look at the other things we can test. The other thing we can test also is, you know, we made this code for find cars and we made this code for add car. So let's make our manager, let's add a bunch of cars to it, and then let's do the find cars to see if it works right. Okay, so we make this car, let's make a car manager. Car manager equals new car manager. Oops. All right, so we made a car manager. Let's add a car onto it. A car manager dot add a new car. We'll add this new electric car to it. And we're not going to print it out. I'll talk about this in a second after I get it typed out. That car. There we go. All right. So we made a car manager, and now we're going to add this car. What car are we adding? We're adding this new electric car. And then we're going to add this new gas car. Let's make 4 things in here. Let's add 2 more. cm.add car. It'll be another new electric car. It's 2013, whatever. The make will be Toyota. The color will be orange. It's electric car, so the charge is 50%, and it is not rented out. Let's make 1 more. It'll be another gas car, 2020. It'll be a Jeep Wrangler that is silver. What else do we have? Oh no, oh yeah, we don't have the make in there, or not the model in there. So it's just a Jeep. It's silver. It has 10 gallons of gas in it, and it is rented out. All right. So now we have 4 cars in our car manager, right? So now let's find a car. So for our car, let's go back to our car manager. So this is that add car. That's what we just did here. We're adding a car. And now let's try out this find cars method. And we want to test whether it's working correctly or not. So how do we test if this is working correctly or not? As we actually call it. So it returns a list of cars. So it'd be car manager list, car manager dot find cars. And we want to, and we can find the cars based on the make of it. So for this, actually, let's also call this a Ford. Right. So let's find cars, all the cars that have Ford in it. All the cars that where the make is a Ford. And then let's print out those cars. Let's do a loop. And then we'll print out each car. All right, so what's happening here? We made a car manager. We've added 4 cars onto it. Now we're going to make a list, and it's going to be the car manager. We're going to find the cars, all the cars that have this make. And how does it know to look at the make? Because when we did the car manager find cars, whenever we did this code, we're comparing the make of the car. So that's why it's searching the cars for a specific make. And then we'll loop through that list it found and then print it out. So when we run this code, what should we have? Well, there are 2 of these cars that have Ford in it, right? So this list should be only those 2 cars. And so this printout should just be those 2 cars. Let's run it. And there you go. We get printed out this electric Ford and then this gas Ford. And that's right. It doesn't, we don't get the other cars because the other cars are not Fords. They're Chevy and Toyota. But let's say we put a Chevy here and we should only get one. We should just get, this one right here. Let's run it. The Chevy. There we go. We get just that one Chevy. Of course, if we put Toyota, then we get just this one Toyota. Well, let's say if we put something that doesn't exist, what are we going to get? We actually don't get anything printed out because there was nothing in the list. So some convenience thing we could do here, we could say if the size of the list is 0, that means it didn't find anything. We could just print out, sorry, didn't find anything. Else, we can print out the list. So let's start with that Ford again first. When we do the Ford, it prints out those 2 Fords. But then if we have something that doesn't exist, we can run it and it says, sorry, didn't find anything. Okay, so that's pretty much all there is for this find cars. So the add car works and the find car works. So let's, we'll do the load from file last. So let's do the rent. So we can rent a car based on ID. So that kind of tells me each car also needs an ID. So actually, let's add an ID onto our car. String ID. We need to add it as a parameter. String ID. This dot ID equals that ID. Oops. Then also in our subclasses, just like we had to add that rented on there, we need to add this ID. And as you can see here, I'll reiterate again, we're just adding small little changes as we go through the assignment. We're not trying to do it all at one time. Small incremental changes. All right, then we have that added. Now when we add a car, the first thing now needs to be an ID. So we'll say it's 1, 2, 3. This ID, say 2, 3, 4. This ID will be 345. And this ID will be 456. The IDs can be whatever you want them to be. I'm just making up some really simple, quick things. Okay. And then let's just print out the Fords again. Oh, let's go to our car. Let's add our ID on here as part of the string that's printed out. There we go. So now whenever we print out a car, it also prints out the ID. Let's run it. You know, this found the two Fords. So there we go. It's an electric car. Let's go to our main. So an electric car with ID 123. You know, and the rest of the parameters, it's a gas car, ID 456, and you know, the rest of the stuff for the car. So now all of our cars have IDs, right? All right, we're getting close. So for the car manager, so we want to rent a car based on ID, right? So first, we need to find which car has that ID. So let's loop through all of our cars. Loop through all the cars. Compare the car ID to the parameter. So if the car, we need to get the car ID. So let's add another get method, just like we had the get method for the make. Let's get the ID. This will get the ID of the car over at the car manager. So if the car's ID is equal to the parameter ID, we found the car with the ID. So now rent it out. Actually, let's make this a little bit more, actually, no, let's leave it like this. We'll add another method in a minute. So let's rent it out. Okay, so how do we rent out a car? Well, a car, it has a parameter called rented, and that's, you know, is the car rented or not? So we need a way to change if the car is rented or not. So here, let's set rented, and we'll give it a Boolean parameter, just like this right here. Rented equals the rented. So now the car has a parameter called set rented. We give it this parameter, and we just change the variable. We change the variable if the car is rented or not. Let's go back to our car manager. So like I said, here we loop through all the cars. We're comparing the ID. If we found the right ID, then we have this car. And once you have the car set rented, we'll set rented to be true. Okay. And then if we found that, then we're done. We can go ahead and return from the function. Because once we find the right car with the ID and we set the car rented to be true, then we can just go ahead and return. While we're at it, let's add one more function on here. Kind of the opposite of rent. We'll call it return. Well, we can't call it return. Check in. We'll check the car back in. Bring ID. And it would be kind of the opposite. So we can reuse a lot of this code. But instead of setting it rented, we can set the rented to be false because the person returned the car. Now return the car, right? So the check-in is kind of the opposite of the rent. For the rent, we looked through all the cars. We found the car with the right ID. Once we found the right car, then we set it rented to true so that the car is marked as it's rented out. And then kind of the opposite for the check-in, you know, we look through all the cars. We check the car ID when we find it. We set the rented to be false, meaning the car is checked in. So let's test this out. Let's test out this rent and this check-in. Let's go back to our main. All right. So for the Ford, all right. Yep, we'll print those. Actually, let's add a method to the car manager so that we don't have to keep going through all of this finding type stuff. So let's add a method to the car manager, the toString. So what we'll do, we'll just print out all of the cars that are in the car manager. So we have a string S, start out being blank. Let's loop through all the cars. The S plus equals that car's toString plus a new line. And then we will return the S. What this is just doing is taking the car manager, converting it to a string, and it'll just be a print out of all of the cars that's in the car manager. So for here, let's just print out the car manager, out.println, the car manager.toString, just so we see what it looks like. Let's run that. And there we go. There's all of the cars in the car manager. All right. Let's change these all that they're initially, everything is not rented out. Let's say the rented all be false. Let's run it. And there you see all the cars are not rented out. So now let's rent out one of the cars. So we'll leave that print out println. Then we'll print this just so we can tell the difference where one printout begins and the other printout ends. And let's rent one of the cars. So car manager, let's rent car 234 with that ID. We'll also rent car 456. And now let's print out our car manager again. All right, so what we got, we made a car manager, we added these 4 cars onto it. We're just going to print out the car manager so we can see everything that's in there. We're going to rent out these 2 cars. Then we'll print out the car manager again so we can see the difference. Let's run it. There we go. There are our 4 cars. All of them have false. They are not rented. Now we print out after we do the rent, we print out the cars. And now look, the car with 234, this car right here, it now says it's rented, it's true. And car 456 is this one, and it has true, it is now rented out. So that's how we can rent out cars and have them marked as rented. So let's rent out that one car. Let's print it out, and then let's check it back in. So instead of rent, let's check it in, and then print it out again. So what are we doing? We make car manager, we add all the cars. We're going to print out the car manager. We're going to rent one specific car. We'll print it out so that we can see it's rented. We're going to check that car back in, and then we'll print out the car manager so that we can see it's no longer rented out. All right, let's run that. There we go. There's the car manager. We're messing with car 234. So car 234 right now is not rented out. That's how it starts. After we rent it, car 234 is now true. It's rented out. Now we check it in, and now car 234 is false. It's not checked out anymore. It's not rented. It's back to false. All right, so that works. So for our car manager, the toString works. We're able to print out all the cars. The check-in works. The rent works. Is there anything else? So now we're at the load from file. This is actually most of what you have to do for your assignment. The load from file is really it's going to be the hardest part in all of this. So let's start tackling it. So first of all, if we're going to load from a file, we need to know the file name. What file are we going to load it from? Okay. So for me, I'm just going to make a file on the desktop, on my desktop here. Let's make a new file on the desktop, we'll call it cars.txt. There we go. So now, how do we read a car from here? Well, we can make up whatever kind of format that we want. You know, every program has like its own unique file format for its whatever kind of files it saves. So it is up to us, it is up to the programmer. How would you add a file on, I have a question, how would you add a file on a Mac? I don't have a Mac. I mean, I would say you're going to have to Google how do I add a file on a Mac. I imagine you could probably right click on the desktop and do some kind of new file or something like that to add a file into the Mac. But I would just type in a web browser search how to add a file on a Mac. I mean, it should be, like I said, it should be very simple. Probably just right clicking the desktop and add file or something like that. Okay. So here we're just going to have a file called cars.txt. Now the format, what kind of data is in the file, that is completely up to the programmer. I'm going to show one way to do it for our cars, but you can do it however you want to do, as long as you're able to read and write cars from the file. Okay, so let's think about what is a car. So what data is in a car that we need to be able to read and write so that we can recreate the cars in our programming? What's really the variables that are part of your car. So really, we need the ID, we need the year, we need the make, we need the color, we need if it's rented or not. So, this is for a car, but then also for an electric car, what do we need? We also need the charge, right? Charge. And for a gas car, we need the gallons, right? So that's kind of the information that we need in the file so that we can recreate a car. I mean, what I have typed out right here, you can't just type that and it works. No, you actually need the values, right? So let's start out easy. So for a car, for the ID, let's say the ID is 789. For the year, let's say it's a 2015. For the make, let's say it's a, what's a car I haven't used yet? My mind's blanking out. Let's just call it a Jeep. For the color, we'll say it's silver. For the rented, we're going to say it's false. It's not rented yet. But now, what kind of car is it? Is our car going to be electric or is our car going to be gas, right? That's actually what you need to kind of start with. Is this car an electric car or a gas car? Let's just say this is a gas car. So if it's a gas car, it has all of these, it has all this stuff, but also we need to put in the gallons. So let's say, just say it has 11.2 gallons, right? So is this all the information we need to make a car? The answer is it is. Because to make a car, we need to know what kind of car it is. We need to know, is it an electric or gas car? So that's what we have right here. Then we need to know the ID, which is 789. We need to know the year, which is 2015. We need to know the make, which is a Jeep. We need to know the color, which is silver. We need to know if it's rented or not, and we're just going to say it's not. And then, since it's a gas car, we also need the gallons, which is the 11.2. Okay. So now, how do we read that file? That's the next part. So here's how we can read it. So in this car manager load from file, somehow we're going to get that file name, and we'll address that somehow after we make this method. But somehow we've already gotten the file name. So now we need to open the file. We need to read the contents of the file, and we need to make the appropriate car depending on what the contents of the file was. So let's start off. by reading the file. We can do that with what we call a buffered reader. When we make it like this, a new buffered reader, a new file reader, and you give it the file name. So what that buffered reader is doing, what we're doing here is really we're opening this file and we're saying we want to read from the file. So how do we read from the file? Do it like this. The line is equal to the buffered reader dot read line. Okay. So what this will do, actually, let's do it like this. While string line, I think we can do this. No. String line equals blank. Oh man. Give me a second to think here. Line buffer reader dot read line. Not equal. Sometimes I get my programming languages confused. I think we can do that. I do a lot of different programming languages. I think we can do that. Throws exception. Oh, I'll explain this in a second. Okay. So dot out dot print ln. Here's how we're going to test it so far. All right, there we go. So when we call this method load from file, we're going to give it the file name. This method can have an exception, and the way it can have an exception is if this file doesn't exist, we're going to get an exception, and we'll have to handle that exception, but we'll do that a little bit later. First, we want to get the meat of this method done. So here we're just trying to open the file so we can read from it. Then we just have a variable line. It's going to start out being blank. And now we're going to say line is equal to this buffered reader dot read line. What this does, it will read one line from your file, and this string, this line variable, will be that line from the file. So if we look at our file, the first time this loop happens, it's going to read the first line. So the first time, this variable line is equal to gas, right? The next time in the loop, the line will be 789. The next time, the line will be 2015, and so on and so forth. So for testing it out, let's just print out what the line is that it read. All right, let's start by there. Start small and build on it. All right, let's delete out the rest of these things. So we only have the car manager. So let's do the car manager dot load from file, and the file is just what's this file name? I think it's, and this will be different depending on Linux or Windows or Mac, what the actual file name is. But at the end of the example and in your assignment, you have to let the user choose the file. So in the end result for your code, you won't hard code this file name in here. You'll actually let the user choose it. But for our testing, we're just going to manually type it in. So I think this is right. This cars.txt will load from file. And since this can have an exception, we got to have a try and catch around it. Because this load from file can have an exception, and it'll have an exception if this file name doesn't exist. So if it doesn't exist, then we'll print out that exception, and then we'll run from there. All right, let's run it and see what happens so far. Actually, we got an exception. That file name does not exist. I figured that was going to be the case. Let me get the exact file name. ls pwd home. Oops. I think this is going to work. Paste. No. All right. So it's /home/DJ Steffi. Oops. /DJ Steffi /desktop/ it should be cars.txt. Let's see if that's able to load that file. There we go. All right, so that loaded the file because we don't get the exception. So now, if we look at our load from file method here, so we open the file and this just reads one line at a time and then prints out that line. And if you look at our cars, that's what it's done. It read the gas and it printed out gas. It read the 789, it printed out the 789, and so on and so forth, right? So this first time in our loop, for this file, it gets the word gas, right? It could have been electric though, right? If it's an electric car, then the first word is electric. If it's a gas car, the first word is gas. So for example, the first word is gas. So we need to see, is it gas or is it electric? Right? So if line equals gas, it's a gas car. Else, if the line equals electric, it's an electric car. All right. So if it's a gas car, let's go ahead and read in the rest of the stuff. All right. So what's the next thing? The next thing is the ID, right? So string the ID is the next line. Then we have the year. Now the year is an integer, and you've seen in a previous assignment how you take a string and convert it to a number. So we'll have integer.parse int from the next line. These read lines keep reading consecutive lines. So when the line was the first thing, the gas, the next line is the ID, that's there. The next line is the year, which is there. What's the next line? The next line is the make. The next line is the color. What's the next line? The next line is true or false. Is it rented out? I think it's boolean.parse. Yep, read line. And then the last thing, if it's a gas car, it's the number of gallons, right? Float.parse float.read line. All right. So now we have all the information we need to make a gas car, right? So let's make a gas car. New gas car. And we know it's a gas car because that first line was gas. So what are the parameters to gas car? Well, we already have it. We have the ID, the year, the make, the color, the gallons, and if it's rented, because we've read all those from the file. All right, so we made the car. So now let's add it to our list of cars. And there we go. We have now successfully read a gas car from the file. Let's check it to make sure we're working. So make sure it's working. Let's go to our main. So we do a car manager. We're loading the cars from the file. So now let's print out the car manager so we can see all the cars in it. System.out.println car manager.toString. So if this worked correctly, we should have one car in there, and it should be this car right here from the file. So you can see we haven't manually added any car in here. We haven't created this car ourselves. We're reading it from the file. Let's run it. And there we go. We read that car from the file. If you look, it matches up. It's a gas car, 789, 2015, Jeep Silver, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You see this matches up exactly with our file. And now we can change something in our file. Let's say instead of silver, it was a red car. Let's change it, save our file. Now let's run it. And you see now it's red. So we are indeed reading the car from the file. Now let's change it to electric. And instead of gallons, it's the charge. Let's run that. Well, now we're not getting anything. And why didn't we read the electric car? And that's because car manager. We haven't done that part yet. You know, we did all this stuff if it was gas, but now we need to do it if it's electric. And electric is almost the same. So let's just copy and paste this and change what we need to. So we read out electric. The next thing is the ID. That's fine. Then it's the year. Then it's the make. Then it's the color. Then it's rented. But instead of gallons, it's now the charge, right? And instead of making a gas car, we're making an electric car. Instead of gas, we give it the charge, right? So now let's run this and test it with the electric car. So when we run it, we now see we do have an electric car. We did this electric car from the file. Say Jeep, red, false, charge 75%. Let's say we drive it around a while and the charge goes down to 25%. Let's change it in the file. Let's save it. Let's run our program. And now you see the charge is 25%. So we are reading it from a file. Okay. So that works. That load from a file. So now what if we have more than one car? Well, the good thing is, since this is in a loop, then we can, obviously it repeats over and over and over. This loop is going to keep running as long as there's something in here to read. So what we can do, we can add more than one car here. Just make them consecutive. So let's say we have an electric car first. Second, we'll have a gas car. Let's change the ID to something else. Let's change it to 2010. Let's change it to a Ford. Let's change it to green. Let's say true, it is rented out. And since it's a gas car, it's gallons. So for gallons, let's say 7.6. Let's run it. Let's test it and see if it works. Notice we didn't have to change anything with our code. We just had to add more cars in here. Let's run it. There we go. Now we have both cars. We have this electric car. We have this gas car. Let's add one more, just so we can have 3 of them to start with. Let's add one more in here. So it's another electric car. Let's change the ID to something else. Let's change it to a 2020. 2020. Let's say it's a Toyota. Let's say it's not red, green, it's blue. Not rented out, and it's electric, so it needs a charge. So let's say the charge is 88%. Let's save our file. Let's run it. And there you go. Now we have all 3 cars. So our car manager, this load from file, it is working. It's able to load all these cars out of this file. Okay. For your assignment, you also need to do the reverse of that. You need to be able to save to a file. So let's look at how the save to the file works. So that's our load from file. Let's make another method, void save to file. And somehow we'll get the file name, and we'll expand on that later. So first, we want to write every car we have out to the file. So let's loop through all the cars. For car in this.cars to write this car to the file. 1 second. Okay. So just like we had a buffered reader, here in a load file, we had a buffered reader. Now we need a buffered writer because we want to write to the file. Buffered writer, called BEW, equals a new buffered writer, new file writer, and the file name. And this can also throw an exception. There we go. So we're going to create the buffer writer. And now, just like we went through and read all of the cars, now we need to go through and write all of the cars. So how do we do that? We need to write all of the parameters for the car to the file. So, you know, when we look at the file, the first thing we write is if it's gas or electric, right? So the first thing we need to write is if the car is gas or electric. We can, in Java, we can do that like this. If the car instance of a gas car, that means this car, it's a gas car. It's not an electric car, it's a gas car. So if that's the case, we want to write gas. And that'll be the first thing in the file. Just like, for example, the first thing here is electric. But if it's a gas car, we want to write gas. Else, if car is an instance of electric car, we want to write electric. Okay. So after that, we need to write the ID. Well, we also need to have new lines in between it because each of these are on their own separate line. We need to do a new line. Is it new line? Yep, new line. Let's just kind of have it like this. There we go. So we'll write out gas and then we'll do a new line. That way we have gas on its own line. The same thing with electric. Okay. So then we have the ID. So let's write the ID. bw.write. See the car dot get ID. And then we need to do new line. And then we have the year. So bw.write. Need the car dot year. We don't have a get method for the year yet. So let's make a get method for the year so that we can get the year. So we have get for the make and the ID, but we need it for some of the other stuff too. We need to get the year, return this dot year. What else do we need? We need the make, but we already got the make. We need the color, string get color, return this dot color. We need, if it's rented or not, this lets us set if it's rented, but we need to be able to get if it's rented. Turn this dot rented. And what else is there? Rented, oh yeah. And then for an electric car, you know, it has the gallons, excuse me, has the charge. For a gas car, it has the gallons, right? So for a car, it doesn't know, it does not know if it is gas or electric, right? So we need to put that in the subclasses. The gas car can get the gallons. Public float get gallons. Return this dot gallons. And for an electric car, we can return the charge. Float get charge. Return this dot charge. There we go. So now let's actually make this easier on us. Right. So here we know the car is a gas car. So we write gas, then we need to write the ID, car.id. Then we need a new line. And what's after the ID? The ID is the year, car.year, new line. Then what's after year? After year is the make, car.make. It's a little bit tedious. That's all right. After make is, it looks like the color. Dot right, car.color. New line. After color is true or false if it's rented. Car.rented. pw. New line. Oh yeah, since if when we look at write, these are the things we can write. We can write a string, we can write a character array, you know, kind of and stuff like that. There is no write Boolean, so we actually need to convert this Boolean to a string. It's actually really easy to just do that right there. That makes, whenever we add a string and we add this Boolean value, it just makes the whole thing a string, true or false. And so then we can write that string. And then the last thing is, for a gas car, it is the gallons. So we need to write the gallons, but we can't just do car.get gallons. And why? Well, we can do it like that. The reason why we have to do it like this, right, yeah, same thing. Oh, excuse me. So the reason why we have to do this gas car like this is because the car, it's just a generic car. Okay, this car at this point doesn't know if it's gas or electric. The car variable itself doesn't know if it's gas or electric. And so this is the way we tell the car, you are a gas car. And then we get the gallons from that gas car. And then just like we have to do with the Boolean here, we can do it like this. Because get gallons is a float, we can convert it to a string like this. Dot. And then we do a new line, and then we're done. So this is everything to write a gas car. Let's kind of do the same thing with the electric car. Electric car is almost the same. Except with the electric car, instead of putting gas, it's electric. And it's not a gas car, it's an electric car. And for that, it's a get charge and not a get gallons. Okay. That's a lot going on in there, but let's test it out to see what happens. All right, so that's our save to file. So let's go to main. All right, so here we're loading in all the cars. I'm not going to worry about printing it out. So we're going to load in this cars, right? Let's rent out one of the cars. Let's rent out the first one, 789. We're going to rent it out. Now let's save to file. And we're going to save it to a different file just so we can look at the files side by side to see if it looks right. So we'll save it to cars too. And it also needs the, oops, didn't mean to do that. Yeah, it also needs the try catch because it can be an exception. Okay, so what are we doing here? We're making a car manager. We're loading the cars from a file. We're going to rent out the car 789, which is this first one. Now we're going to save the car manager back to a file. We're going to save it to a different file. That way we can just open the file side by side and see if it made the appropriate changes, if it looks right. Yeah. All right, let's run it. So we ran it. There we go. Nothing got printed out because we weren't doing any printing, but we did make this car to the file. Let's open it. And then if we look, make these side by side. Yep. There we go. Oh, why is it blank? Oh, I think I need to do the close. Oh, I hope we did this right. I believe what we failed to do, let's go back to our car manager. So we opened up this file and we wrote all this stuff to it. When you're done, you need to close the file. So at the end here, let's do vw.close. And really, we should do the same thing in our read file. In our read file, we open up in our load file, we open up our file. We also need to close that file as well. vr.close. All right, let's run this and see if it works right. Let's delete that cars too. All right, let's run it. There we go, it's done. Open up cars too. There we go. Yeah, they're in there. We just failed to close it. Oh, something funky is going on here. That's some weird letters over there. So we kind of need to figure out what's going on, why it has those weird letters. Oh, actually, I know why. See, this is a bug in our code that we have to fix. So where is that funky stuff happening at? It's actually every time we're printing out a year, it's having that problems. So let's look at our year printout. And, just like we had to make this Boolean a string, we had to make this float a string. We actually need to make this year a string like that. The other ones don't need that because ID is already a string, make is already a string, color is already a string. So let's add it for there and then add it here for our electric car. So should look good now. Click this cars, let's run it and open it up. And there we go. Now it looks right. So line them up side by side. There we go. And if you look, what did we do that we need to look for the change or main? Remember, we loaded the cars and we rented out something, and then we saved it back. We rented out 789. If you look at 789, it was false. Dang it. There we go. There we go. So 789, it was false that it's not rented, but now it's true, it was rented. Yeah, I see your message. Do you not need to do flush? Yeah, whenever you close the file, it does the flush. So let me show you. So going back here, instead of closing, we could do bw.flush. And what that does, it does immediately write everything out to the file. But the close also does that flush. And since we were done with the file, it makes sense to just go ahead and close it. So what we could do, every time we wrote this whole car, we could do like a flush, not a close, but we could do a flush in there so it immediately writes it to the file. Sure, you can do that. Because what's actually happening here, it's a buffered writer. So what it does, whenever you do this writing, it stores a lot of information in memory, and then it'll write that out all at one time to the file. It does it for performance reasons. And so instead of, this small little write, the small little write, the small little write, it'll let you do a bunch of small little writes until it gets to a certain size, and then dump that all at one time into the file. And like I said, it's for performance reasons. So the bug we had why it didn't write it out at first is because it was building up all of these small little writes in memory, but it wasn't to the point that it wanted to write it to the file yet. And then our program just ended before it had the chance to write to the file. So we could either do the buffered writer.flush to immediately write it to the file, or just make sure we close the file and then it will immediately write to the file. Okay. So why is it important? Why do we need to read from the file? Why do we need to write to the file? Well, for your assignment, your program needs to remember if something is rented out or not. So if I run my program right now and I rent out a car, I rented out this Jeep, that means the next time I run my program, it needs to remember that Jeep was rented out. All right, so let's look at it like this. So now instead of writing it to a different file, let's write it to the same file. Oops. All right, let's close all these files. So we have this cars. So we have this cars. It looks like this. Nothing is rented out right now. We're going to do the same program. We're going to read from the file. We're going to rent out that car, and then we're going to write that back to the file. And yeah. So before we rent it out, let's also print out, just so that we can see the difference. CM.toString. There we go. So make the car manager, load it from the file. We're going to print out the car manager, which, that just prints out all the cars in there. We're going to rent out that specific car. Then we're going to save it back to the file. Let's watch what happens. Save it, run it. There we go. There's our 3 cars that came from the file. You can see the electric one is not rented out yet. The gas one is rented out, and that's just because it's true. It's true in the file. And there's our electric car. So let's close the file and reopen it, because now we have this rented out. So when we open the file now our electric car, it is rented. And when we run our program again, let's say we don't want to do this rent again. Let's just comment that out. But now, the last time we ran it, 789, it was not rented. The first time we ran the program, the car was not rented. But then we ran the program and rented it out and wrote back to the file. So now this time when we run the program, you're going to see it remembered that we rented it. And there you go. Now that car is rented out. So that's how your program remembers each time you execute it, whether a car was rented or not. And for your assignment, that's determining if a media is rented or not. All right. And also, we'll do this one more part from the loading and saving to file, and then we'll move on to the last part of the assignment. So right now, we just have these 3 cars, right? So we have a car manager. We're going to load from file. Let's add a new car. A new gas car. What's the ID? Will be 890. The year will be 2018. The make will be, what we got here? We got Jeep, Ford, Toyota. Say it's a Chevy. The color, we got red, green, and blue. Let's make it yellow. It's a gas car, so what's the gallons? It has 4.5 gallons. And rented or not will be false. It's not rented yet. Let's go here. So car manager, loading it from a file. We're adding a new car. We'll still just print it out. I'm not going to do the rent anymore. We've already shown that works. And then we'll save it back to a file. So what's going to happen here? So it's going to load all of these cars from the file. It's going to add a new car into the manager. It's going to print the manager, and then it's going to write it back to the file. So what you'll see happen is whenever this write back to the file happens, we're going to have another car added into the file. Let's run it. There we go. There's all the cars. The 3 from the file, the new one we added. And now the file changed. And now we have 4 cars in there. Of course, the last one is that gas car we just added. So now, let's say we didn't add this car in there. So instead of adding the car, we're just going to load it from the file. And you see we have all 4 cars in there. Okay, so I think that shows you everything that you need to be able to do to load and save media from a file. So let's kind of do the last part that I'm going to show you, which is how do we choose what that file is? Okay, now your assignment says the user needs to be able to change the file, which I believe it does. Let me make sure I'm still correct about that. Selection load. Yep. Selection to load media files from. Yep. Okay. So let me show you how to let the user decide what file that it uses to load the cars from. All right. So let's close this. So we have what we call a J file chooser. It's a GUI that lets the user choose what file they want to load. All right, and it looks like this. It's a J file chooser, JFC, whatever variable name you want to use. It's a new J file chooser, and you tell it what directory you want it to start off in. We'll say their home directory. There we go. So this is going to make a J file chooser. It's just a GUI that the user can click through different directories and different files to choose whatever file they want to choose. And this is telling it, this is a parameter saying, start off in the user's home directory. Okay. And then here's how we show it on the screen. We say it has a return value. It's going to equal the J file chooser show open dialog, and you can put a parent in here. So if you're building up a complex GUI, then you can give it like a parent window or something like that. But we don't have any other windows, so we can just make the parent null. It doesn't have a parent window. It doesn't have a parent GUI. And now we can say if the return value is equal to jFileChooser.approve, that means they actually chose a file. That means they chose a file. Else, they did not choose a file. And so if they didn't choose a file, let's just give them an error. And we can do that, with the J option pane, just like we have for previous assignments. Show a message dialog. And for that, we have the parent, no parent. And the message will be, you didn't choose a file. Yeah, and we'll just leave it at that. And then we'll just exit the program. Do a system.exit or something. So this way, this will show the jFileChooser up on the screen. If they do, user chose a file, and the else is user did not choose a file. So let's test this right here. Let's see what happens if they don't choose a file. Let's run it. Well, there you go. There's our jFileChooser right there, where I can browse around and look for whatever file I want. For us, I can look at the desktop, and there's our cars.txt. But let's say I don't choose a file. Let's click cancel, meaning I don't choose a file. And then it gives me this pop-up, this J option message dialog. You didn't choose a file. It says you didn't choose a file, okay, and the program exits because I said exit the program. So that part right there works. If they don't choose a file, the program just exits. All right. So if they do choose a file, we need to figure out what file it is that they chose. And here's how we do it. Let's have a variable that keeps the file name. If I can spell it right. Starts out being blank. But if they do choose a file, let's get the file name. And it looks like this: jFileChooser.selected file, get selected file, get selected file, dot, I believe it's, get absolute file. There we go. We'll say the file name is equal to that. And then I think it's, give me a second. Directories. Get parent, get path. I think it's just get name. Yeah, let's try that. Can't remember right off the top of my head, but let's check it out. Let's test it. System.out.println. Let's print this file name and make sure it is correct. Then after that, temporarily, we'll just exit because I don't want to do the rest of the program yet. I just want to test this right here. So if we choose a file, let's see if this prints out the whole file name, and then we'll just exit. Okay, let's run it. There's our jFileChooser. Let's find that cars file on my desktop. There we go. And it prints that out, and that's correct, right? That is the name of that file. Okay, so now we know file name is the name of the file that the user chose. So we don't need to print it out. We don't need to exit anymore. So now at this point, let's add some comments in here to help us out. Allow user to choose the file. User chose a file, so save the file name. User did not choose a file, and we'll show that here. Let's create our car manager. Load cars from the file the user chose. So instead of this file name, it's actually going to be this variable file name, because that's what they chose out of the jFileChooser file name. print out the car manager, and then this saves car manager back to file. And again, instead of hard coding that file in there, we're going to use that file name of the file that the user chose. Okay. Let's run that. There you go. Here's our file chooser. We click cancel. You didn't choose a file, and the program terminates. Let's run the program again. Let's actually choose our file. It's on my desktop. It's this cars.txt. There you go. It loaded the cars from the file. Loaded the cars from that file name. It printed them out, and then it saved it back to the file. Right back in there. Okay, that is like 90% of what you need to do for your assignment. Obviously, I'm doing an example here for cars. Your stuff is for media. There are just going to be some things that are different. So, obviously, don't copy and paste directly from this, because this is specific for cars, and you can reuse a lot of it, but you have to change it to fit your media instead of cars. There is a few things you have to do for your assignment that I just did not cover. And I consider those more basic, simple things and things you have had to do for other assignments. So I'm not going to cover those in this video. You can certainly reach out to me for assistance. If you need some more help, I have no problem with that. But that's as far as I'm going to go code-wise. Just some extra things you have to do that I did not do for my sample. It's stuff like making a menu, clicking this, select. You got to be able to select which car that you want to rent out. So, for example, whenever I rented out a car, I just did car manager.rent, whatever ID I want to rent. But, for your assignment, you have to let the user type in or let the user select which car they want to rent. And those are the things that you have to figure out to do. But we have done, very similar things on assignments in the past. So that's why I'm not going to go over them here. Plus, we're running up kind of on an hour and a half here. So I want to, kind of start wrapping this up. All right. That's it. That's all the example. Couple notes before I open it up. Like I said at the beginning of the video, I cannot accept any work or any assignment after Tuesday night, Tuesday being March 8th. So March 8th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time is the deadline to turn in anything. No work will be accepted after that. As I've said several times before, if you did poorly on a previous assignment, you can go back, fix your mistakes, and resubmit it. Just resubmit it back through the course website, and I will regrade it. However, there will be late point penalties associated with it. But if you did really poorly, if you fix your mistakes, even with late penalties, you could improve your grade. Yeah, so reach out to me if you have any problems, any issues, if you need help. But I do go to sleep at night. So if you email me at like 10 p.m. on Tuesday night, chances are I won't see that, before 11:59 that evening. So if you need help, sooner the better. If you wait till the last minute, there may not be much I can do to help you. All right. If there's any questions, I'll stand by for a couple minutes, but otherwise we'll go ahead and shut it down. I will get this uploaded to the course website here in the next hour or so you can review at your convenience. All right, any questions? All right, no questions from the personnel and attendants. Thanks for listening to me go on for an hour and a half. And good luck. Need anything? Let me know. All right. Have a good weekend.